Welcome back to How to Fix Couples Assessment Part 2. My name is Dr. Jordan Harris, and yeah, I'm doing this. It's a free online training for people who want to assess couples better. So look, we've already gone over Part 1, and in Part 1, we sort of talked about the issue with imposter syndrome, right? Where basically all these therapists feel like they aren't good at what they do, and the reality is they're not, and that's okay. The problem is that when we go to people we ask to help us, they gaslight us and they say, actually, it's not you. It's not you. Just keep trying hard. Just keep working at it. You're really doing good work. Remember, it's more about you showing up in the room. And I think all these things are true, uh, except that when they're said and they end up invalidating our own experience, right? When they invalidate our own experience about, hey, actually, this case is not going well. Actually, this thing happened and I don't know what to do. And so that's why I'm doing this training is for us to actually learn some more practical skills um, when it comes to working with couples, right? And what we talked about last time was the fact that the way that we've been taught to think about couples assessment is kind of flawed. It's just broken. And luckily, we have the answer, right? The answer um, is what we're going to talk about today. So a brief overview. What we're going to talk about today is John Gottman's work, right? Next time we're going to go in depth on how to use Gottman's work in order to fix couples assessment, and then we'll end with how I think that this fix changes everything. But let's sort of dive in, and before we talk about John Gottman, we need to go back. We need to go back to Daniel Kahneman. So as I said last time, Daniel Kahneman is this Nobel Award winning psychologist. He won a Nobel Award in economics. That's how profound his stuff was, right? That he won a Nobel Prize in a different field. And if you read his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, there's a story about him when he was a young cadet. I think it was like a cadet or something in the military. So he grew up in Israel. And in Israel at the time, I think it's still this way, you have to do mandatory service in the military. So he was doing his mandatory service, and because he had like a few years of psychology training, he was put in charge of assessing um, who would be good officers, right? So he would get all these young recruits. They run them through all these team building and leadership exercises. Then he had to use his intuition to assess and say, are these people going to be who in this group is going to be a good leader? And so they would make these assessments, and then they send them off to higher ups, and months later, years later, they'd follow up with these people. What they found out was that the assessments that they were making were always wrong, right? So from a statistics standpoint, they were no better than chance. So they were basically guessing. And so Kahneman comes into this sort of situation, sort of this circumstance, and he's like, wait, these assessments have no validity. Like there's no relationship between the score that I give this cadet today and what happens 3, 4, 5 years down the road and their leadership ability. That's crazy. I mean, it's crazy that the system was continuing to move that way, right? So he comes into this and he's like, so I can see this now after being in this for 3 or 4 or 5 months, but also when I ask everyone around me, they already know that the scores that we give these new recruits has no correlation. It's not related at all to their actual performance outside of like basic training. So why are we doing this? Um, and I think Kahneman, probably very wisely so, asked a better question. His question was, how would we actually improve this? And so what he did was he began to break down what make a good leader, right? Um, and he would ask his other raters to break down what would make a good leader. And then, so they would say things like, well, a good leader would need to be, able to be a person of integrity, right? A good leader would need to be very knowledgeable on military procedure. A good leader would need to be very educated on the tactics of the enemy. A good leader would need to be someone who uh, is able to inspire confidence in his colleagues. And so then what he would do is that he would have the co-raters rate the new cadets, the new recruits, on those 4 or 5 dimensions, right? And then he would have them average their scores together on all those dimensions. And he followed up with those cadets, you know, later. And what he found was that when you did it that way, there actually was a small, it was small, but it was much bigger relationship between the score and the actual outcome. And so later on, when he became a full psychologist, he began to really study this. And what he found was that this is actually a really common thing, right? And it sort of was popularized by this statistician named Robin Dawes. He wrote this really awesome paper that no one has read because no one reads academic papers on statistics except for nerds like me. And what Robin Dawes had found is that most of the time in complex systems, in areas that we don't have complete knowledge about, you don't need some sort of complex mathematical model. You don't to sort of make sense of things. What you need to know really are the 3, 4, or 5 variables that are most important. And most of the time, if you understand those 3, 4, 5 variables really, really well, right, you are just as good as these complex models at predicting outcomes, right? So Robin Dawes in this paper, The Robust Beauty of Proper Linear Models in Decision Making, which I have uh, jokingly nicknamed the awesome elegance of simple solutions. He has a bunch of examples of this, right? So for instance, you don't need to do some sort of complex mathematical model to figure out how happy someone is in their relationship. You can take the number of times that they have sex, subtract the number of times that they have fights, and if that number is above 1, right? If they have more sex than they have fights, they probably are doing pretty well. Like most of the time, that one stat alone will get you 80% of the way, right? Same thing with like students in like school, right? You don't need to look at someone's like transcripts and their like resume and if they were president of the debate club. No, like you look at their GPA, look at their standardized tests, you have those 2 scores, you generally know how they're going to do in like college, right? So there's all of these things that um, if you just know a handful of the right variables, you can mostly get there. The sort of modern day example of this is what's called the APGAR score. So like I just had a kid a few months ago, and when you go into the hospital and the baby was born, they gave your baby an APGAR score, right? And it's basically like 10 different variables that if your kid is doing okay on these different things, they're basically healthy, right? Are they jaundice or are they not, right? Are they crying or are they not? Have they pooped or are they not? There's a bunch of all these different things. And you don't have to have some sort of high-tech solution for this. Um, these simple models, knowing the variables, gets you most of the way. And so what we learned from people like Daniel Kahneman and from Robin Dawes is that there's a middle ground, right? On the one hand, you don't want to just go off of your own intuition. That can be easily flawed. And on the other hand, most of the time, you don't need these super complex solutions. What you need is an understanding, and this is sort of like the middle option of the handful of most important things. If you have a good grasp of what those most important things are, then the rest sort of takes care of itself. So this leads us to John Gottman, right? John Gottman, as many of you know, in my opinion, he's like one of the foremost couples therapists, researchers on the planet. He's done some amazing research, and I don't think people really get the full impact of Gottman's research. I'm going to get to that in a second, but what he's found, right, is that there are these 4 patterns of communication: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling, that can predict whether a marriage will stay together or dissolve, right? And that's amazing that he can predict whether a marriage is going to resolve. And he can sort of also tell when a marriage will dissolve, right? He says that the 4 horsemen are predictors of early divorce, but emotional withdrawal is a predictor of later divorce. So not only can he predict what is going to happen, he can also predict when it's going to happen based off these different markers. Now, John Gottman is really, really brilliant, right? Because what he's actually done is he's developed a mathematical model that can predict the future. If you are a fan of science fiction, like I am, you know that this person who's not John Gottman, who's right next to him in this photo, is Harry Seldon. Right, Harry Seldon is one of the main characters on this TV show called Foundation. Foundation is about this statistician who makes this mathematical model that can predict the future, right? And John Gottman is basically like the living incarnation of this science fiction character. It's like crazy. It's mind blowing. But the thing that I'm going to propose in the rest of this training is, if we know what the most important variables are, we actually don't need this in-depth sort of mathematical model most of the time. If we know that the major predictors of early divorce are criticism, contempt, stonewalling, and defensiveness, those 4 things, then if we get really clear on what those things are and how they look in the room, we don't need to be able to do this complex statistical mathematical models like John Gottman does. And for me, learning this stuff has been amazing. And I don't want to oversell it, so I'll just talk about my own experience. Because once I took a deep dive into the 4 horsemen, I learned how to code them, I learned how to really see them in my sessions. It gave me this real sense of, I know what to expect. I know what's going on in the room. And that really gave me a sense of what I can do as a therapist. Because what I would propose to you is, people feel like an imposter when they don't know, right? I think the mental sort of test for this is, do you feel like an imposter when you're driving your car? Like, if you're out in traffic and you're going to work, do you feel like an imposter because of how you drive? Most of us, probably not, right? Do you feel like an imposter because of how you brush your teeth, right? Are you sitting at home brushing your teeth? I guess you're standing at home, brush your teeth at nighttime. Like, do you feel like an imposter? No. These are things that that you can do. And so I think that once we learn what we can actually do for a couple and what we can't do for a couple, changes everything. And I'm going to go into more depth in that later. But for me, that's why this stuff is really important, because it gives me a greater sense of clarity in the room of, oh, this is something I can fix. This is something I can't. I know what to expect. So yeah, I'll post this video, I think, on YouTube. If you enjoy it, you can subscribe or whatever. And I'll see you in the next installment.